Hey guys, it's Mel'zan. So today I'm going to be going over my sword and shield plus spear build in New World at level 30. Before we get started on the video, I just wanted to say that this build is not necessarily what is optimal. This is just the build that I've been using so far. I want to go over what I feel strengths and weaknesses are with you, and if you would like to use it, feel free to change whatever you want. With that being said, let's begin. Alright, I also feel like I should clarify that I designed this build around PvP and solo PvE content. This build was never designed or intended to be good at expeditions and content such as that. Alright, the first thing I would like to talk about with this build is going to be attributes. I tried to have it roughly be 40-ish% strength, 40% dexterity, and 20% constitution. I put no point into intelligence and focus. I split strength and dexterity fairly equally because sword and shield is primarily strength and secondary dexterity. Spear is primarily dexterity and secondary strength. This sort of balances them both out. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's talk about abilities. First, sword and shield abilities. Alright, so the abilities I use with sword and shield are shield bash, reverse stab, and leaping strike. I do not typically use whirling blade. I only have this for if I'm doing expeditions. So as for why I use each ability, shield bash is a stun. It is an amazing stun. It's hard to dodge, it's pretty easy to hit with. It can also go through grit. It's a 2-second stun and it will hit somebody even if they have grit. This is incredibly useful in PvP. Next, leaping strike. I use leaping strike mostly as a way to chase people, or to start fights. You don't typically want to throw your spear at the start of a fight against a ranged player. Leaping strike will help you get in close. And it can be used to chase people down and get that final hit on them, as running away can be very effective in this game and pretty hard to catch up to. Lastly, reverse stab I use mostly just as a pure damage ability. There's not a lot else in the sword and shield tree that I would take, and it does a pretty sizable chunk of damage that can be used to score a good hit right after shield bash. Alright, so let's move on to the passives. In the defender tree, I have sturdy grip. Stamina is reduced when blocking melee attacks with a shield, as well as high grip, which is the same effect but for ranged attacks. These are both very important, especially the ranged attack one, because you need to get in close with sword and shield, and is really difficult when you don't have any ranged weapon yourself and you're fighting somebody that does have a ranged weapon. Stamina is also not all that plentiful, and so you want as much of it as you possibly can, especially in PvP. Final strike, if you hit a foe below 30% health, you deal 50% more damage. This affects leaping strike, and is not all that important. I mostly take final strike only to get to the next passive, which is cowardly punishment. And this is if you hit somebody in the back with leaping strike, it slows them. This is really important for chasing people. I also have critical precision. On a critical, gain 20% haste, more movement speed, more chasing ability. Mobility lets you move faster while blocking, again important for closing in on your opponent. Confidence is just a 15% extra damage while you're at full health. This is not a huge deal, it's mostly just another buff. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing particularly important. This one can be easily swapped out. This gives reverse stab grit. I generally like all my abilities to have grit. Nothing super important about it. It's just a nice ability to have. And if you hit somebody with reverse stab, all cooldowns are reduced by 25%. All sword cooldowns. This is again just a rather nice ability, does not necessarily play into anything else. Although, reducing the cooldown on shield bash can be very important. Okay, so let's move on to spear abilities. For the spear, I take javelin, sweep, and skewer as my abilities. As for why I take each of these abilities, I take javelin just because it is a fairly decent chunk of damage and it can stagger from a distance. This can be very important in certain situations. Sweep is in my opinion one of the best abilities I have seen in this game. It is a large AoE sweep in front of you that knocks targets down. It also deals some decent damage. Very important if you plan on doing PvP with the spear. Skewer is a fairly sizable chunk of damage and is a fairly decent all-around ability. It has a bit of range, it's not too hard to hit with, and it applies a bleed. I take this for much the same reason I do as reverse stab, is a good follow-up to any knockdown or stun. Okay, so now let's move on to the passives for the spear, starting with the Impaler tree. The first one, the Impaler tree I have, is Precise Jabs. It's an extra 5% critical chance on light attacks. This is not a huge or important passive, but it's not bad either. Finishing Blows is an extra 15% damage against targets with less than 30% health. This can be important for chasing, like I've explained other times. When people want to run, it can be pretty hard to kill them. This will help you do that. This does plus 20% damage against targets with active grit. This is not super useful most of the time, but when you can throw your javelin or your spear with javelin at them from far away, if they are using an ability, you could, for instance, dodge away from them, then throw your javelin into them, extra damage there. And it can also combo with Shield Bash, which is often used when your opponents have grit. Aggressive Maneuvers is after you dodge, the next ability used within 2 seconds will reduce the cooldown of all other spear abilities by 20%. Again, not super important, but it's very useful for reducing the cooldown of sweep, because you want sweep as much as you possibly can. Exposed Wounds is an extra 15% critical chance against targets with bleed. This just combos very well with Skewer, and it's a nice extra chunk of damage. In the Zoner tree, I take Forceful Impact as my first passive. This makes it so that Javelin knocks targets down. This is incredibly useful in PvP. The more knockdowns you can get, the better, especially if you can do it at a range. It also combos with this one, Merciless Strength. It does plus 25% damage against targets that are knocked down. This is another good chunk of damage, and I quite like it because it combos well with Javelin and Sweep. As for the first ability, I have a passive of Sweep. Sweep now has Grit. I love Grit on all attacks, especially Sweep. You do not want to get knocked down while using Sweep. This one, press basic attack during Sweep to follow up with a powerful downward stab that does extra damage. This, combined with this, can do a lot of extra damage. It can be a really sizable chunk of damage. Refreshing Precision. Headshots reduce cooldown by 50%. This is just useful, more javelins, more knockdowns. Strong Conditioning, 30% stamina regen where stamina is below 50%. This, combining with some of the passes I showed you earlier in the Sword and Shield tree, means that you'll rarely have stamina issues, and can be very, very important during PvP. So that is my build as of level 30 in New World. And as for its strengths and weaknesses, is fairly decent at what I made it for, which is PvP and solo PvE content. I do especially well against players that are using Warhammer. It is, however, a little weak to ranged builds like muskets and bows, given that it has no range itself. Anyway, that's it for now. I will soon be making a video of PvP tips of how to actually use this build. If you want to see that and other New World videos, please like and subscribe. You can also check out my Twitch. I will leave a link in the description. And I will see you guys next time.